The first bark cut through the noise of the street, like a warning no one was ready to hear. It was sharp, urgent, and full of panic. People nearby turned their heads at the same time, expecting to see a threat, a suspect, something dangerous. Instead, they saw a pregnant woman standing frozen near a bus stop, one hand resting protectively on her stomach, the other clutching a worn handbag. And right in front of her, straining against his leash, was a police dog barking louder with every second that passed. At first, it looked like a routine scene. Police patrols passed through this area every day. The K-9 unit was known here, respected and feared. The dog, a large German shepherd with alert eyes and a rigid stance, was trained to detect danger, drugs, explosives, anything out of place. When he barked like this, people usually stepped back. Officers usually moved fast. But this time, something felt different. The dog wasn't aggressive. His barks weren't angry. They sounded desperate, almost pleading, as if he was trying to say something no one understood. The woman looked terrified. She backed away slowly, her breathing shallow, her eyes darting from the dog to the officers approaching her. She kept repeating the same words in a shaky voice, telling them she hadn't done anything wrong, that she was just waiting for the bus. Her clothes were simple, her face pale with exhaustion, the kind of tiredness that comes from long days and longer nights. A few people in the crowd whispered, already judging, already assuming the worst. That's how it often starts. The officer holding the leash tightened his grip, giving the command for the dog to stop. But the dog didn't listen. He pulled harder, nails scraping against the pavement, nose lifting toward the woman again and again. His body trembled with urgency. This wasn't disobedience. It was insistence, the kind that comes when instinct fights against training. The second officer stepped closer to the woman, asking for her identification, his tone firm but controlled. She fumbled with her bag, hands shaking so badly she almost dropped her wallet. The dog barked again, louder now, drawing even more attention. Traffic slowed. Phones came out. A small crowd formed, curiosity mixing with tension. Everyone felt it. Something was about to happen. The officer with the leash tried again, this time more forcefully. The dog finally paused, but his eyes never left the woman. He let out a low whine, a sound that didn't match the situation at all. Trained police dogs didn't whine like that. Not during a stop. Not without reason. The handler frowned, confusion flickering across his face for just a moment before professionalism took over again. The woman subtly bent forward, slightly, wincing. She pressed her hand harder against her stomach, her face tightening as if a wave of pain had passed through her. She tried to straighten up, embarrassed, whispering that she was fine. But she wasn't fine. Anyone who looked closely could see it. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool air. Her breathing grew uneven. The dog reacted instantly. He barked again, louder than before, spinning in a tight circle before pulling forward so hard the leash went taut. This time, the bark echoed with urgency, not warning. Heads turned. Even the crowd went quiet. Something in that sound made people uneasy. The officers exchanged a quick glance. One of them told the handler to move the dog back. Another asked the woman if she needed medical help. She shook her head quickly, fear flashing in her eyes. She said she couldn't afford trouble. She said she just needed to go home. The words tumbled out fast, as if she was more afraid of the situation than whatever pain she was feeling. The dog wasn't convinced. He lowered his head, sniffing the air, then the ground near her feet, then lifted his nose toward her again. His tail was stiff, his ears alert, but his eyes were different now. They weren't focused on threat. They were focused on her, on something about her that no one else seemed to notice. People in the crowd began to murmur. Some thought the dog had detected something illegal. Others wondered if the woman was hiding something. A few felt a strange discomfort they couldn't explain. The handler knelt briefly, trying to calm the dog, whispering commands under his breath. The dog ignored him completely. Another wave of pain hit the woman. This time, she gasped softly, her knees buckling just a little before she caught herself on the bench behind her. Her face drained of color. That was when the dog let out a sound that made the handler freeze. It wasn't a bark. It was a sharp, urgent whimper, followed by rapid barking that echoed down the street. The handler had worked with this dog for years. He knew every sound, every signal. And this wasn't in the manual. This wasn't something they trained for. His heart began to race, a knot forming in his chest as a thought crossed his mind. What if the dog wasn't reacting to danger, but to distress? The officer radioed for backup, unsure what else to do. Another officer suggested calling an ambulance, just to be safe. The woman protested weakly, saying she didn't want to cause problems. She said she was fine, that she'd felt pain before, that it would pass. But her voice lacked conviction. Even she didn't believe it. The dog barked again, stepping between the woman and the officers, positioning his body close to her legs as if shielding her. That single movement changed everything. Police dogs didn't protect civilians like that during a stop. The handler's breath caught. The crowd reacted with a ripple of confusion. For a brief moment, time seemed to slow. The woman leaned back against the bench, eyes closed, breathing shallow. The dog stood firm beside her, muscles tense, refusing to move. The officers hesitated, torn between protocol and instinct. Sirens could be heard faintly in the distance, though no one knew yet if they were coming for the scene or passing by. And that's when the handler realized something was terribly wrong. Not with the woman, not with the dog, but with the way they were all seeing the situation. By the time the truth began to surface, precious minutes had already slipped away. Minutes that would soon matter more than anyone there could have imagined. And as the dog barked again, louder and more desperate than ever, one question hung heavy in the air. What was he trying so desperately to tell them? And had they already waited too long? The handler slowly loosened his grip on the leash. Not because he wanted to, but because the dog's tension was pulling straight through his arm and into his chest. He had felt this dog lock onto threats before, had seen him alert on hidden weapons and suspicious bags. But this was nothing like that. This was focused, emotional, almost personal. The dog's breathing was fast, his chest rising and falling, as if he was carrying the weight of something unseen. The woman tried to speak again, but her words came out broken. She apologized over and over, saying she didn't mean to cause trouble, that she would leave if they wanted her to. She avoided eye contact, staring at the ground like someone who had learned long ago that attention often led to consequences. Her hand never left her stomach. It stayed there, fingers pressing lightly, then tightening every time another wave of discomfort passed through her body. One of the officers asked her name. She answered quietly. He asked where she was going. She said home. Just home. No address, no details. The kind of answers that sounded simple on the surface, but hinted at a deeper story underneath. The crowd listened closely now. A few people had stopped recording. Others leaned forward, sensing that this wasn't going to end like a normal police stop. The handler crouched beside his dog again, his voice low and calm. He told him to sit. The dog sat, but only halfway, his body still angled toward the woman, his eyes never leaving her face. A soft whine escaped his throat, followed by another sharp bark that echoed off the nearby buildings. The handler swallowed hard. He remembered the training sessions, the endless drills, the lectures about instinct versus obedience. He remembered being told that dogs sometimes sense things humans miss, but he had never truly understood what that meant until now. The woman's breathing became more uneven. She wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, her face showing more fear than pain. Fear of the situation, fear of authority, fear of being misunderstood. She kept insisting she was okay, but her voice trembled in a way that told a different story. The bench behind her felt suddenly too hard, too cold, yet she leaned against it as if standing had become an effort. A memory surfaced in the handler's mind, uninvited. Years ago, during training, an instructor had once told him a story about AK-9, who refused to leave a man's side during a routine check, barking and whining until paramedics were called. The man had collapsed minutes later. At the time, it sounded like a rare exception, almost a legend passed around to remind them to respect their dogs. Standing there now, that story didn't feel so distant. The officer with the radio tried again to get an update. The response crackled through, unclear, delayed. Everything felt delayed. Time stretched in strange ways. Seconds felt heavy. The dog stood up again, stepping even closer to the woman, his shoulder brushing against her leg. She flinched at first, then froze, unsure what to do. Slowly, hesitantly, she rested her free hand on the bench to steady herself. People in the crowd began to whisper different theories. Some wondered if the dog could sense fear. Others thought maybe he smelled something medical, something wrong. A woman near the front hugged her coat tighter, eyes wide. A man shook his head, muttering that this didn't feel right. The air itself seemed tense, like it was waiting for a decision no one wanted to make. The handler stood up slowly, his gaze moving from the woman to his dog and back again. He asked her gently if she had felt like this before. She nodded, but added that this time felt different. He asked how far along she was. She hesitated, then answered quietly, "Not very far." "Too early," she said, as if the words carried some kind of shame or worry. The dog barked again at the sound of her voice, his ears twitching. Another wave of pain hit her, stronger this time. She gasped, gripping the edge of the bench. Her knees bent, and for a moment it looked like she might collapse. Instantly, the dog reacted, stepping fully in front of her, barking urgently at the officers now, not at her. It was as if he was demanding something from them, though no one knew exactly what. The handler felt his heart pounding. He knew protocol. He knew rules. But he also knew his dog. And his dog had never acted like this without reason. Still, doubt crept in. What if he was overthinking it? What if calling medical help caused unnecessary trouble for the woman? What if doing nothing was worse? The woman's eyes met his for the first time. They were filled with fear, but also with something else. Hope. A silent plea. She didn't say anything, but her look lingered, as if she was trusting him to decide what happened next. The weight of that trust settled heavily on his shoulders. The crowd shifted again as a distant siren grew louder, then faded, passing by on another street. It wasn't for them. Not yet. The woman's shoulders slumped slightly, relief or disappointment hard to tell. The dog let out a low whine, pacing a small circle before stopping right in front of her again. The handler noticed something then, something subtle. The dog wasn't scanning the area anymore. He wasn't alert to the crowd or the street. All of his focus was on her, especially her stomach. That realization sent a chill through the handler's spine. Dogs were trained to detect substances, scents, changes in behavior. What could he be detecting now? The officer with the radio asked quietly if they should call medical services anyway. The handler hesitated, glancing at the woman. She shook her head weakly, lips pressed together as if holding back tears. She whispered that she just wanted to go home. The dog barked sharply at her words, startling her and drawing everyone's attention back to him. Another officer stepped closer, concern finally outweighing suspicion on his face. He asked her if she had eaten, if she had slept, if she had felt dizzy earlier. She answered slowly, each word costing her effort. The dog's tail flicked once, his body tense, his eyes locked onto hers. The handler felt torn between two worlds, the structured world of rules and the unpredictable world of instinct. Around him, the street seemed to hold its breath. The woman leaned heavier against the bench now, her strength clearly fading. The dog stood firm at her side, refusing to move, refusing to be silent. Whatever the truth was, it was getting closer. And with every passing second, the feeling grew stronger that the dog had been trying to warn them all along. Not about danger from her, but danger to her. And the question no one could escape anymore was whether they would understand his warning in time, or the cost of waiting would soon become impossible to undo. The handler took a small step back, giving the dog just enough space to move while keeping the leash secure. His thoughts raced. Every rule he had learned told him to maintain control, to assess threats, to keep situations contained. But nothing in his training explained a police dog acting like this around a pregnant woman, who clearly wasn't a threat. The dog's behavior felt less like an alert and more like a warning, the kind that comes when something is already going wrong. Across the street, a middle-aged woman watched closely, her hands clasped together. She had been there when the first bark echoed through the air. Now she noticed how pale the pregnant woman looked, how her lips trembled as she tried to steady her breathing. The woman took a hesitant step forward, then stopped, unsure if she was allowed to get involved. No one wanted to cross a police line, even an invisible one. The pregnant woman shifted her weight again, wincing. She tried to straighten up, forcing a weak smile that didn't fool anyone. Her thoughts were racing too. She worried about missing the bus, about explaining herself, about being judged. But beneath all that was a deeper fear she didn't want to name. A feeling that something inside her wasn't right. She had felt pain before, yes, but this felt sharper, heavier, like her body was sending signals she had learned to ignore. The dog sensed a change immediately. He stepped closer again, pressing his body lightly against her leg. His presence was grounding, almost protective. She flinched at first, then relaxed slightly, surprised by the warmth and steadiness of him. The handler noticed this interaction, how the dog's posture softened around her, while remaining tense toward everyone else. It was as if he had chosen his side. One of the officers cleared his throat, breaking the silence. He suggested moving the situation along, maybe letting the woman go if there was no clear reason to detain her. The handler nodded slowly, but the dog didn't move. He stood firm, ears alert, eyes fixed. The handler felt a growing unease. Letting her walk away felt wrong. Holding her there felt wrong, too. The radio crackled again with an update that still wasn't clear. Backup was delayed. Medical services hadn't been called yet. Everything hovered in uncertainty. The crowd remained, drawn in by the unusual scene. Some whispered prayers under their breath. Others exchanged uneasy looks. Phones lowered as curiosity turned into concern. The pregnant woman suddenly felt dizzy. The world tilted slightly, sound becoming muffled. She grabbed the edge of the bench tighter, her knuckles turning white. The dog reacted instantly, barking sharply and stepping in front of her again, forcing the officers to pause. His bark wasn't loud this time, but it was intense, focused, filled with urgency. The handler's heart pounded. He remembered how this dog had saved lives before, alerting them to hidden dangers they couldn't see. He trusted this dog more than his own instinct some days. Still, doubt lingered. What if he was misreading the situation? What if fear was clouding his judgment? From the woman's point of view, everything felt like it was slipping out of control. She hadn't planned for this. She had only wanted to get home. Now strangers were watching her, officers were questioning her, and a police dog refused to leave her side. Part of her felt exposed, vulnerable. Another part felt oddly safe, like the dog was the only one truly paying attention to what her body was trying to say. A younger officer, standing slightly behind the others, noticed the way the dog positioned himself. He had grown up around dogs and knew enough to recognize stress signals. This wasn't aggression. This was concern. He leaned closer to the handler and spoke quietly, suggesting they listen to the dog. The handler didn't respond, but the words stayed with him. The pain came again, stronger than before. The woman gasped, unable to hide it this time. Her knees bent, and she slid down onto the bench, breathing fast and shallow. Panic flashed across her face. The dog barked loudly, spinning once before planting himself directly in front of her, as if blocking the world from getting any closer. The crowd stirred. Someone called out, asking if she was okay. Another voice suggested calling an ambulance. The officers felt the pressure mounting, eyes on them now, waiting to see what they would do. The handler felt sweat trickle down his back, despite the cool air. He knelt beside the dog again, his voice low, almost pleading. He asked him what he smelled, what he sensed, even though he knew the dog couldn't answer. The dog looked back at him briefly, eyes intense, then turned back to the woman, letting out a soft whine that sounded almost like a cry. The pregnant woman closed her eyes, fighting tears. She didn't want to break down in front of strangers. She had learned to be strong, to endure discomfort quietly, but her body was demanding attention now, and she didn't know how much longer she could ignore it. The handler stood up slowly, decision weighing heavily on him. Around him, the street felt different now, quieter. He realized that whatever was happening wasn't just about procedure anymore. It was about trust in instinct and experience, in a dog who was trying desperately to communicate something urgent. The dog barked again, sharp and commanding, his gaze fixed on the handler this time. It felt like a challenge, a demand. The handler swallowed hard, feeling the tension stretch even tighter. He knew that whatever choice was made next would change everything. And as the pregnant woman struggled to breathe and the crowd waited in uneasy silence, the question remained unanswered. Were they finally listening to the warning, or were they still moments away from realizing the truth far too late? The handler raised his hand slightly, signaling the other officers to hold back. His voice felt tight in his throat, but he managed to ask the woman again if she could stand. She tried, pushing herself up from the bench, but her legs trembled and she sank back down almost immediately. A quiet gasp escaped her lips, followed by a sharp intake of breath she couldn't control. The dog reacted at once, barking and shifting closer, his body rigid with urgency. The street felt smaller now, as if everything was closing in. The crowd leaned closer, no longer curious but concerned. A few people exchanged worried looks, silently urging the officers to act. The handler felt the weight of their eyes, the pressure of responsibility pressing down on him. The woman's vision blurred at the edges. She focused on the dog's shape in front of her, the steady rise and fall of his chest. Each breath she took felt shallow, forced. Her hand clutched her stomach again, fingers digging into the fabric of her coat. She whispered that something didn't feel right, her voice barely audible. It was the first time she had admitted it out loud. The handler's radio crackled again. This time, the message came through more clearly, but it wasn't what he was waiting for. Backup was still a few minutes out. The words fell heavy. Minutes suddenly sounded like a lifetime. He glanced down at his dog, who was now pacing in a tight circle, nails clicking sharply against the pavement. Every movement screamed urgency. A man in the crowd stepped forward despite himself, asking if they needed help. An older woman clasped her hands together, whispering a prayer. Someone else suggested calling an ambulance again, louder this time. The tension hung thick in the air, pulsing with every second that passed. The dog stopped pacing and let out a long, distressed whine that made the handler's chest ache. He lowered himself into a partial crouch in front of the woman, his head tilted upward, eyes locked onto her face. It almost looked like he was waiting for something or warning her not to move. The woman's breathing became more uneven. She tried to slow it down, but panic crept in, making it harder. Her heart raced, and a wave of fear washed over her. She felt small, exposed, and suddenly very alone, despite the crowd around her. The only thing grounding her was the dog, steady and unyielding. The handler felt a shift inside himself. Protocol began to fade into background as instinct took over. He had seen fear before. He had seen emergencies unfold in seconds. And this felt like one of those moments where hesitation could cost more than action. Still, doubt lingered, whispering that he could be wrong. One of the officers stepped closer to the handler, speaking quietly but urgently. He pointed out the woman's condition, the dog's behavior, the growing concern from the public. The handler nodded, jaw clenched, eyes never leaving the scene in front of him. Suddenly, the woman cried out softly, a sound caught somewhere between pain and fear. Her body tensed, shoulders hunching forward. The dog barked sharply, louder than before, snapping everyone's attention back to him. He pulled at the leash again, this time toward the open street, as if urging him to move, to go somewhere else. The handler stumbled a step forward, surprised by the force. His heart pounded. It was as if the dog was no longer asking, but insisting. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing the urgency. The handler could hear his own breathing now, loud in his ears. The woman's strength was fading fast. She leaned heavily against the bench, eyes half closed, struggling to stay upright. Sweat ran down her temple. She whispered again that something was wrong, her voice cracking this time. Fear finally broke through her composure. The handler made eye contact with her, trying to keep his voice calm. He told her to stay with him, to keep breathing. The words felt inadequate. The dog barked again, tail stiff, ears forward, his whole body vibrating with tension. A siren sounded in the distance, faint but growing. No one knew yet if it was for them. Hope flickered briefly, then dimmed as the sound wavered. Time stretched painfully. Every second felt like a test. The handler felt caught between two choices, both heavy with consequence. The dog stood firm, unwavering, his warning impossible to ignore now. The crowd waited in silence, holding its breath along with the woman. And as the woman's breathing grew more labored and the dog let out one last, desperate bark that echoed down the street, the moment teetered on the edge of something irreversible. Whatever was about to happen next would change everything, and no one could escape the feeling that they were standing at the final threshold, with the truth just seconds away from being revealed. The siren grew louder for a moment, then faded again, turning down another street. A wave of disappointment rippled through the crowd. The handler's chest tightened. That sound had felt like a lifeline, and losing it made the situation feel even more fragile. The dog reacted too, lifting his head and barking sharply toward the direction the siren disappeared, as if calling it back. Then something unexpected happened. The dog suddenly froze. He stopped barking, stopped pacing, stopped pulling. His body went still, ears locked forward, eyes wide. For a split second, the silence felt heavier than the noise ever had. The handler noticed it immediately. This kind of stillness was never random. It was the same posture the dog took right before a major alert, the kind that meant something critical had shifted. The pregnant woman felt it too. A deep, unsettling sensation washed over her, different from the pain she had been feeling before. She pressed her hand to her stomach again, panic rising fast. Her breathing hitched, and her eyes filled with tears she couldn't hold back anymore. She whispered that she felt dizzy again, that the ground felt like it was moving. The handler stepped closer, heart racing. He opened his mouth to call for medical assistance again when the dog suddenly let out a low, urgent growl. Not aggressive, not threatening. Warning. The sound sent a chill through everyone nearby. At the edge of the crowd, a man in a dark jacket stiffened. He had been watching quietly from the start, saying nothing, staying just far enough away to avoid attention. Now his gaze locked onto the woman, then the dog, then the officers. He took a step back, then another. It was subtle, but the handler noticed. The dog noticed too. His head snapped toward the man, and he barked once, sharp and commanding. The handler tightened the leash instinctively, confused. This was new. The dog had been focused entirely on the woman moments ago. Why shift now? The crowd murmured again, tension rising in a different direction. The man avoided eye contact, blending back into the people behind him. One officer glanced over, alert but unsure whether to intervene. The handler felt torn, his attention split between the woman struggling to stay conscious and the dog now alerting to something else entirely. The pregnant woman gasped suddenly, a sharp cry escaping her before she could stop it. Her body tensed, shoulders curling inward. The dog snapped his attention back to her immediately, barking louder than before. The moment with the man was gone, replaced by something more urgent. But the handler couldn't shake the feeling that the interruption mattered. He knelt beside the woman, speaking softly, asking her to focus on his voice. She tried, but her words slurred slightly, fear flooding her face as she realized she was losing control. She admitted she hadn't felt the baby move in a while. The words hit the handler like a punch. The dog let out a long, distressed whine, his body trembling. He pressed closer to her again, almost leaning against her legs as if trying to hold her upright. The handler had never seen him do that before. Police dogs weren't trained for comfort, yet here he was acting on something deeper than commands. The younger officer took out his phone, hesitating only a second before calling emergency services himself. He spoke quickly, describing the situation, the pregnant woman, the police dog behavior. The handler caught his eye and nodded once, silently grateful. Before anyone could relax, the woman's vision darkened further. The street sounds blurred into a distant hum. She felt herself slipping, panic clawing at her chest. She whispered that she couldn't feel her legs. The dog barked frantically, pulling so hard the handler had to brace himself. The crowd reacted, voices overlapping now. Someone shouted for space. Another person pushed back gently, creating a small clearing. The handler felt time collapsing in on itself. Everything was happening too fast, and not fast enough at the same time. Then the dog did something that shocked everyone. He broke from his rigid stance and lay down directly in front of the woman, blocking her path forward. He barked once, then twice, then looked straight up at the handler, eyes burning with intensity. It wasn't confusion. It was instruction. The handler's breath caught. He suddenly remembered another detail from training, something rarely discussed. Dogs could sometimes detect internal medical distress through scent changes, especially in emergencies. If that was true, then the dog wasn't just reacting to what was happening now. He might have sensed something before anyone else could see it. The pregnant woman slumped forward slightly, barely staying upright. The handler reached out instinctively, steadying her shoulder. Her skin felt cold. Too cold. Fear surged through him. From the corner of his eye, he saw movement again. The same man in the dark jacket was leaving, walking faster now, disappearing down the sidewalk. The dog caught it too, lifting his head and barking once in that direction, then immediately refocusing on the woman, as if torn between two urgent threats. The handler's mind raced. What if there were two dangers unfolding at once? One visible, one hidden. The dog's divided attention felt like a warning layered on top of another warning, both screaming to be heard. The sound of sirens returned, louder this time, unmistakable. Relief washed over the crowd, but the tension didn't ease. Not yet. The woman's eyes fluttered, her breathing shallow and uneven. The dog stayed planted, refusing to move, barking in short, urgent bursts. As flashing lights reflected off nearby windows and the situation edged closer to a breaking point, one truth became impossible to ignore. The police dog had known something from the very beginning. And whatever that truth was, it was bigger, more dangerous, and more time-sensitive than anyone had imagined. The street held its breath again as help drew closer, the mystery deepening instead of clearing. And just before the emergency vehicle turned the corner, the dog let out a final bark, not a warning, but of urgency so raw it felt like a plea, leaving everyone with the chilling realization that the worst might still be ahead. The emergency vehicle finally turned the corner, lights flashing against the buildings, siren cutting through the heavy silence like a blade. Relief washed over the crowd, but it was sharp and fragile because the woman was slipping fast. Her head dropped forward, her breathing shallow and uneven. The handler and the younger officer moved at the same time, steadying her, guiding her carefully down onto the bench so she wouldn't fall. The dog barked once, loud and commanding, then went silent again, eyes locked on the approaching paramedics. His body stayed tense. Every muscle coiled as if he was waiting for confirmation that help had truly arrived. When the ambulance doors flew open and the paramedics rushed toward them, the dog finally let out a low, strained whine. The paramedics knelt quickly, checking the woman's pulse, her breathing, her responsiveness. One of them asked how far along she was. The handler answered for her when she couldn't, his voice tight. Another paramedic glanced at the dog, surprised by how close he stood, then looked back at the woman's face and frowned. She's hypotensive. One of them said quietly, blood pressure's dropping. The words landed hard. The handler felt his chest tighten as he watched them work with practiced speed, placing monitors, speaking calmly but urgently. The dog pressed closer, nose lifting toward the woman, breathing in deeply as if searching for something he had sensed long ago. The woman stirred slightly, eyes fluttering open. Fear flashed across her face when she realized she was lying down, surrounded by strangers. She tried to speak, but her voice barely came out. One of the paramedics reassured her, telling her she was going to be okay, that they were taking her to the hospital. The dog barked sharply again, drawing the paramedics' attention. The handler explained quickly how the dog had alerted from the beginning, how he refused to leave her side, how none of this had felt like a normal K-9 stop. The paramedic nodded slowly, listening, then looked at the woman again with renewed urgency. As they lifted her onto the stretcher, the dog pulled forward, whining, refusing to stay back. The handler hesitated only a second before loosening the leash slightly, allowing the dog to walk beside them. The paramedics didn't stop him. Something about the dog's behavior told them this wasn't interference. It was instinct. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the stretcher rolled toward the ambulance. Phones were forgotten. Whispers died out. The tension shifted into something heavier, realization. This had never been about suspicion or control. It had been about survival. Just as they reached the ambulance doors, the woman suddenly cried out softly, her body tensing. One of the paramedics froze, checking the monitor again. His expression changed instantly. "We're losing the fetal heartbeat," he said, voice urgent but controlled. The handler felt the words hit him like a physical blow. The dog reacted immediately, barking loudly, frantically, his entire body shaking, as if he was trying to push time itself forward. The paramedics moved faster, loading her into the ambulance, calling for immediate transport. The handler stood at the open doors, heart pounding, watching as they worked. The woman's eyes met his for a brief moment. Fear filled them, but there was also gratitude. She whispered, "Thank you," barely audible. Then the doors closed. The ambulance pulled away fast, siren blaring, leaving behind a stunned street and a dog who stood frozen, staring after it. For a moment, no one spoke. The handler knelt beside the dog, resting a hand on his back, feeling the tremors still running through him. That was when one of the paramedics' words echoed back in his mind. Losing the heartbeat. Not lost. Losing. The handler looked up sharply. He realized something then. The dog hadn't barked in panic when the paramedics arrived. He had barked in urgency, like a countdown. The dog hadn't been reacting to what had already happened. He had been warning them about what was about to happen. A radio call crackled from the ambulance moments later, faint but clear enough. The paramedics reported that early intervention had stabilized the woman. There was still risk, still uncertainty, but they believed they had arrived just in time to prevent something far worse. A collective breath was released on the street. Some people wiped their eyes. Others stood quietly, absorbing what they had witnessed. The handler closed his eyes briefly, relief washing over him, followed quickly by awe. Then the younger officer spoke up, his voice low. He mentioned the man in the dark jacket, how he had left quickly earlier. Another officer confirmed they had identified him on a nearby camera, a pickpocket known for targeting distracted crowds. He hadn't been connected to the woman at all. The dog's brief alert toward him hadn't been a separate threat, but a split-second reaction to movement, immediately overridden by what mattered more. The final twist settled heavily in the handler's mind. The dog hadn't been confused. He hadn't been divided. He had simply been doing what humans struggled to do, prioritizing life over everything else. As the street slowly returned to normal, the handler looked down at his dog, who had finally relaxed, sitting calmly at his side. The chaos was over, but the lesson remained. A police dog, trained to detect danger, had recognized a silent medical emergency before anyone else. Not because of rules, not because of commands, but because instinct saw what hesitation almost missed. And somewhere on the road to the hospital, a woman and her unborn child were still fighting, with a chance they might never have had. All because a desperate bark had refused to be ignored. The streets slowly began to breathe again. People who had been frozen in place started to move, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others quietly talking about what they had just seen. A few strangers exchanged looks that said more than words ever could. They had arrived expecting a routine afternoon, maybe a bit of drama, but they were leaving with a story that would stay with them for a long time. The handler remained where he was, one hand resting on his dog's back, feeling the steady warmth beneath his palm. The dog sat calmly now, ears relaxed, eyes softer, as if the storm inside him had finally passed. Only moments earlier, he had been a force of urgency and desperation. Now he looked like himself again, grounded and quiet, as though his job was done. The younger officer exhaled slowly, rubbing his face with both hands. He hadn't realized how tense he'd been until now. He looked at the handler and shook his head slightly, a mix of relief and respect on his face. "That dog saved her," he said quietly. It wasn't said for credit or praise. It was just a fact. The handler nodded but didn't speak right away. His mind replayed everything. The first bark, the woman's fear, the hesitation, the moments that could have gone differently. He realized how close they had come to missing it, how easy it would have been to dismiss the dog's behavior as unusual but harmless. That thought made his stomach tighten. Later that evening, after the crowd had fully dispersed and the street returned to its usual rhythm, the handler and his dog returned to the station. Word had already spread among the officers. Questions came quickly. What exactly did the dog do? When did he start alerting? Why didn't he stop barking? The handler answered as best he could, describing not just the actions, but the feeling, the instinct that something was wrong long before it was visible. That night felt longer than usual. The handler checked his phone more times than he could count, waiting for an update he didn't even know would come. His dog lay nearby, sleeping lightly, ears twitching occasionally as if still alert in his dreams. The call finally came late into the night. The woman was stable. Doctors confirmed that she had experienced a sudden medical complication related to her pregnancy, one that could have turned dangerous very quickly if ignored. Because help arrived when it did, they were able to treat her in time. There was still monitoring ahead, still caution, but the immediate danger had passed. Her unborn child was alive. The handler closed his eyes and let out a long breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He looked down at his dog, who lifted his head as if sensing the shift. The handler smiled softly and scratched behind his ears. "You knew," he murmured. "You knew before any of us." In the days that followed, the story traveled far beyond that street. People talked about the police dog who refused to stop barking, about the pregnant woman who almost walked away, about how instinct and attention made all the difference. Some focused on the drama, others focused on the lesson. The woman returned to that same area weeks later, this time walking slowly, carefully, her hand resting on her stomach with a different kind of calm. She asked around until she found the station and requested to speak to the handler. When they finally met, she struggled to find the right words. Gratitude filled her eyes, heavy and sincere. She knelt carefully in front of the dog, tears slipping down her cheeks as she thanked him over and over. The dog wagged his tail gently, calm and steady, unaware of the weight of what he had done. To him, it had been simple. He had sensed something wrong and refused to ignore it. She told the handler that she almost didn't stop that day. She almost kept walking, afraid of being questioned, afraid of attention. She admitted she had learned to downplay pain, to endure discomfort quietly. If the dog hadn't barked the way he did, if he hadn't insisted, she would have gone home and tried to wrest it away. That truth lingered with the handler long after she left. The man in the dark jacket was later confirmed to be exactly what they suspected. A distraction, nothing more. He faded into paperwork and reports, no longer important. The real story was never about him. It was about awareness, about listening. For the handler, the experience changed something deep inside. He trusted his dog before, but now that trust carried new meaning. He paid closer attention to subtle signals, not just from his dog, but from people too. He remembered how fear can hide behind polite words, how emergencies don't always look dramatic at first. For the officers who witnessed it, the moment became a reference point, a reminder shared quietly during training and shifts. Remember the K-9 and the pregnant woman. Someone would say when discussing instincts and judgment. It became shorthand for staying open, for not dismissing the unusual too quickly. And for the people who had been there that day, it became one of those stories retold with a pause in the middle, where voices drop and eyes soften. The kind of story that reminds you how close ordinary moments can come turning tragic, and how small choices can change outcomes. The dog never knew he became part of something bigger. He didn't know about the conversations, the lessons, the reflections. He only knew that something felt wrong, and he did what he was meant to do. He listened to instinct when words weren't enough. Sometimes, warnings don't come in clear sentences. Sometimes, they come as a desperate bark in the middle of a crowded street, asking us to slow down, to look again, to care a little deeper. That day, someone listened, and because of that, a woman went home with hope instead of regret. A child was given a fighting chance, and a simple truth was proven once more, that paying attention can save lives, and that the quietest signals are often the ones that matter most.